Thanks, Matt. Mr. Secretary, thank you. If I may, I would like to quote you back to you, if that's okay. Following your meetings last week with Israeli officials, you said, quote, "I underscored the imperative to the United States that the massive loss of civilian life and displacement and the scale we saw in northern Gaza must not be repeated in the South. As I told the Prime Minister, intent matters, but so does the results." This week, officials with the World Health Organization told reporters via video link in Gaza that, quote, "the situation is getting worse by the hour. There's intensified bombings going on around us, including here in southern areas in Khan Yunis and even in Rafah." Have the Israelis disregarded what you requested when you met them last week? And will there be any consequences, either with regard to U.S. military assistance or any other, if Israel continues down this path? And secondly, the Prime Minister Netanyahu also said this week that the IDF can be trusted is the only body that can be trusted with demilitarizing Gaza moving forward when the war ends. Is the U.S. concerned that this will end up in Israeli occupation, whether short and long term? And if not, is there a viable alternative?
I'm happy to start. Vivian, thank you for the questions. So, first, let me put this in context when it comes to what we've been looking for as Israel conducts this campaign against Hamas to try to ensure that what happened on October 7th never happens again, something that we fully support. But as I've said repeatedly, how Israel conducts the campaign matters, and matters a great deal, particularly when it comes to doing everything possible to minimize harm to civilians as well as to maximize the assistance that's getting into people who need it so desperately. I've been to the region, as you know, I think 3 times since October 7th, and actually 4 times to Israel during those trips. During the first trip, we made the case for the imperative of getting humanitarian assistance to move into Gaza. After we left, that assistance started to flow, with the trucks beginning to move into Gaza with the desperately needed assistance for Palestinian people. Second, next trip we took, we focused in on how humanitarian pauses could be beneficial in getting hostages out, getting more assistance in, and allowing people to move about in a way that got them out of harm's way. Well, shortly after we left, that's also what happened. And we saw Israel first establish these corridors in the north, as well as daily pauses to enable people to move from north to south, to do so safely, to get out of harm's way. And hundreds of thousands of people were able to do that and to get out of harm's way. At the same time, we got after negotiations with tremendous assistance from Qatar, from Egypt, we got the pause for hostages. More than 100 hostages were released, reunited with their families, and at the same time, we doubled the amount of humanitarian assistance during that period that was getting in. As well, we facilitated, as I said, the movement of people out of harm's way. Now, on this last trip, as Israel has moved the campaign against Hamas to the south, we have focused in, as you've said, on the imperative of maximizing efforts to protect civilians and get not only assistance in, but to sustain the higher level of assistance that was reached during the humanitarian pause and actually build on it. And what we've seen over the initial days is some important additional steps in the direction of doing just that. The Israelis have been evacuating neighborhoods instead of entire cities, so focusing in on a much more deliberate way on those who may be in harm's way as they conduct the campaign against Hamas, establishing some deconfliction areas, some safe areas that people can go to where they can be safe from being in the line of fire, and having a more narrowly focused area of where this military operation is actually being conducted. Having said that, as we stand here almost a week into this campaign in the South after the end of the humanitarian pause, it is imperative, it remains imperative that Israel put a premium on civilian protection. And there does remain a gap between exactly what I said when I was there, the intent to protect civilians, and the actual results that we're seeing on the ground. There are a number of things that we think it would be important to really focus in on, not only having these safe areas, but making sure that the communications are such that people know where they can go, when they can go there safely, making very clear when the periods of being able to move from one place to another are in place. In other words, these, in effect, daily pauses, making sure that those pauses apply not just to one neighborhood, but to a broader area so that, again, people have confidence to know that they can move out of harm's way and move to a safe area. Making sure that the areas that they go to are fully resourced and supplied with things that people will need to get by while they're away from their homes: food, medicine, water. And again, also making sure that in areas that are clearly out of the conflict zone, that they remain so, that military means not be used in those areas. So this is something that we're talking about with the Israelis on a regular basis, including as recently as today, and including in the President's conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu earlier today. We continue to recognize the extraordinary difficulty of this task, as Israel is dealing with a terrorist adversary that intentionally embeds itself with civilians. But again, Israel has an obligation to do everything possible to put a premium on protecting civilians and maximizing humanitarian assistance. In terms of what comes next in Gaza, we've been very clear on the importance of Palestinians, local voices, local faces, having responsibility and control of Gaza, and ultimately that being joined in control of the West Bank, and ultimately a clear path to fully affirming Palestinian political rights and other rights, and the best way to do that is through two states. Now, there are going to be very challenging questions of security, of governance, of reconstruction that we have to address. David and I talked about some of them today, and we'll be talking about them intensely in the days and weeks ahead, including as well with the many countries that are coming to Washington tomorrow from the Arab League, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, to map that out. But we've also been very clear, as I was in Tokyo, about some basic principles of the way forward, and those include that we cannot have an Israeli reoccupation of Gaza. We cannot have forced displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. We cannot have the territory of Gaza diminished in any way. And of course, we can't have Gaza used as a platform, as it was, for the most heinous acts of terrorism against Israel. And ultimately, as I said, we want to see Palestinian responsibility, Palestinian control for Gaza and for the West Bank.